This week, Kumar and I discuss Walt Simonson's Thor. Why is it such a fondly remembered run? This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. Long time no talk.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's how we start every episode, but it really has been a long time.
6 months minimum.
Yeah, so in December we recorded the first episode of Spider-Man 1963, our Patreon series, and a month before that was the last time we recorded a Deconstructing Comics, the Stan Lee R.I.P. episode. So it has been quite a while. Now we decided to do this one. Gee, it's been a couple of months ago that we chose this. Well, yeah, we did have a different topic, and then in April I think we abandoned it and chose this one instead.
That's an interesting story as well. So we were almost about to do a Black Panther run.
Yeah, the Ta-Nehisi Coates run.
Yeah.
And I read the first two collections, and I was like,
yeah.
It's so
I read one
dry.
Issue. Yeah.
I find it so dry.
Yeah.
Well, it seemed like it was a lot of talking, and it was almost kind of, ironically, considering what we're talking about, kind of Shakespearean. Where, I mean, Thor is too, but I think Simonson's run is so fun, I don't know, in spite of that or because of that, I'm not sure. I mean, it's not dry. Although, when we talked about it a little bit a few weeks ago, you didn't seem terribly impressed by the Simonson Thor run.
Well, okay, so I think this has been on our to-do list for years and years.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I'm the one that put it on there first because I'd never read it. And I was like, this is supposed to be a legendary run that I need to get around to reading at some stage. And I read the first 10 issues. And at that stage, we had dropped Black Panther. And I was like, this isn't really going great for me. And I don't know, maybe I wasn't in the right headspace or whatever it was. But I certainly didn't like it for the first 10. For the first 10, I thought it was it was just a superhero comic where it was just stuff happening, and there wasn't really anything. Well, there was special stuff that happened, and we'll get to that. But I think there was something. It was a little bit. I think it's a year after Swamp Thing and a year or two before Watchmen, and it just seemed ordinary. The delivery of it was very ordinary, and then as soon as we had that chat, I found I really started enjoying it for quite a run. And then it kind of dropped off again, and then it got really great by the end of it. I think I got up to about 366 is how far I got.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it starts with 337, and I got about 3/4 of the way through issue 364, the Thor is a frog issue.
Yes, well, that one is really an amazing comic book. There's the 2 or 3 issues where he's a frog are just awesome.
Yeah.
But the Shakespearean thing was to me, that was really annoying. I actually did find it annoying early on. But then I wondered, halfway through, I was like, this must actually be the selling point for a lot of readers, was the dialogue I found was it became a chore to read for me. But then halfway through, I was thinking, people must have dug this stuff, and that's why they were into it. I think it's part of the appeal.
And I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, my brother and I were buying Thor, and Paul reminded me that we got to issue 300 and we just found it so boring that we dropped it.
Right.
And we didn't buy it again, I don't think, until this started in late 1983. And
actually, tell me about the run before Simonson came on. like, or what you know of it, like who was working on it and what kind of stuff was happening in it.
Well, Len Wein was writing before Simonson took over.
Okay.
I don't remember a lot about it, although for this episode I read 335 and 336 just to kind of see what was going on.
Okay.
And they were okay, but I didn't think it had quite the spark that Simonson put into it.
Right.
And about as far as the Thor speak, I think there's a right and a wrong way to do it, because,
Sure.
I mean, if you just play it so completely straight and dry, it becomes the same problem that I had with Coates's Black Panther, where I think the way Simonson does it, there's so much kind of gusto to it, just a little bit over the top in places, and then he also puts in some bits of humor with it. And I mean, I find it entertaining. Right from the beginning, reading it this time, I found that entertaining.
I found it was awesome in the frog issues, when it was so ridiculous to have the frog speaking in this way. And sadly, that was only 2 issues. But it was kind of a bummer to me that, like, in the first issue, we get Beta Ray Bill. Now, this is a ballsy move for a writer coming in on the first issue of a series to have this sudden replacement Thor basically show up as this alien cyborg lizard thing. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, that was,
move.
that cover came out, and I mean, I remember Paul and I were like, what is this horse skull guy doing wearing Thor's costume? What is going on here?
But it bummed me out that he had almost the same speech patterns as Thor. Like, I would have liked it if he just spoke a bit more normally. He does a little bit, but it's still too... It's still too Asgardian.
Yeah, I did find that a little puzzling.
Yeah. And I think there are enough characters like that he really didn't need to do it with Bill. But it really works with... And it's funny, too, because there was a scene... I found they were talking too much. Like, there's a lot of dialogue on the page, which is part of maybe what... I mean, I could only read 1 issue a day, because they were so dense. There was so much writing in them.
Yes.
And it was all this the Asgardian dialogue.
Yeah.
But
and it's
there's
80s
a scene
comics, so...
Right, it's 80s comics, and there's a scene where they go to England to go to the elf castle or elf realm or something, and Thor falls into a pit. And he starts talking about how he's only got like a second or two before he's doomed, and he's going to hit the bottom. And there's like 2 or 3 panels, and there's a lot of dialogue in this 1 second before he hits the ground. And I was like, does Simonson know what... Does he realize what's happening, or was this Jim Shooter sticking his nose in and saying, no, you got to describe exactly what's happening to every...
Yeah, well, I mean, that was pretty typical of 80s comics too. You'd see a fight scene in X-Men, and during one punch they'd be like a minute and a half of dialogue.
Yeah, for sure. But this was really like, he says, I've only got a second or two, and it's like, okay. But and I think also in the early issues, the artwork was pretty rough. And that improved a lot as well later on. And I mean, it's inevitable. If you're drawing and inking nonstop for a year or 2 years, you're going to get good really fast. And Simonson does get really good, and the art does become the Simonson we know within 10 or 15 issues of it. But early on, it was very rough. And I mean, Lorelei, this one character, never looks the same in 2 panels. And she's supposed to be kind of a beautiful woman, but she's just kind of an ugly collection of lines early on. Like, he really struggles to draw like an alluring woman early on. And that's kind of improved later on. But yeah, early on, and I wonder too, I feel like maybe, despite the Beta Ray Bill thing, I think maybe he might have been a bit on tiptoes for the first 10 issues or 12 issues, because I feel like the storylines were wrapped up very quickly, like within 1 or 2 issues, and there's this whole alien force from another galaxy coming, and the design of the demons is very pedestrian and kind of boring. And almost as soon as the second year on the run starts, it's almost like he got tenured as a professor. And it's like, okay, now you have time. And now the storylines are going to spread out over 5 or 6 issues. And there's a lot more breathing room. and he spends a lot more time developing stories and things, and it was way more enjoyable for me. For me, out of the gate, I mean, Beta Ray Bill was great, but other than that, it was kind of a slog.
That's interesting, because I enjoyed it a lot from the beginning. And yeah, it's interesting. I remember when it started and I was reading it, but then, I was in college, and during college I just fell off of comics completely.
Right.
So I don't think I got much past me. I maybe read to 350 or so.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. But yeah, I think by the time I certainly fell off before that one break issue with Hercules that Simonson didn't work on at all.
Oh, right.
I don't think I'd ever read that before, as far as I can remember, and I'm certainly I remember knowing of the Frog issue, but I don't think I ever read it.
Right.
So it was nice to come back and read these again. I think I appreciated them more now than I did when I was in college.
Right.
Now, one thing that I think is interesting is that he gets rid of Don Blake as an alter ego.
Very interesting, yeah. And they pick that up in the movies, right? There's no Don Blake alter ego in the movies at all, and I think that's definitely the legacy of Simonson.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an Easter egg in that first Thor where I think there was a character called Don Blake, but
where he stole a lab coat or a doctor's coat and
said
Don Blake on the name tag or something like that. I don't remember that movie very much, but I do. That's interesting. Like, in the movies, none of the characters have alter egos except for Spider-Man. I'm trying to think of Marvel characters at this time other than like the cosmic ones on Earth. Did any of them not have alter egos?
I don't think so. Besides the Fantastic Four never did, but aside from them,
that's true.
Yeah,
but despite that, which I think is a great, smart, genius move to get rid of Donald Blake, he does have a very clumsy couple of issues with this other alter ego, who's this burly, like construction worker with the glasses for the disguise and the ponytail, and it's just kind of there's another ballsy issue in there very early on where there's so many other subplots going on that Thor only appears in it for 2 pages, and he's in a secret identity and he's getting a massage from the Lorelei character, and that's it. He's face down getting a massage for 2 pages.
I didn't even notice that.
You don't even see. I thought it was like really, whoa, this guy's got some serious cojones on him to have a comic called Thor and have Thor only appear face down getting a massage for 2 pages. Out of the whole thing. And I think he stumbles with that, and then finally when that's gotten rid of, I think maybe that's the point too for me where the book kind of started to shine a bit more as well.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering why he got rid of Don Blake, but so I was doing some reading a few other places writing about this run, and there's a website it's a blog called Statues and Superheroes. I couldn't find the name of the writer anywhere on the site, but he points out how, compared to earlier runs where Thor tended to fight, mortal Earth villains just like any other superhero would fight, Simonson's run is much more about Asgardian threats.
Yes.
And so you don't need Don Blake around for that. He just kind of gets in the way.
That is true, but we got to talk about some of the most interesting, weirdest issues in this series, which are not the early Beta Ray issues and not the Frog issues, but in the middle of it, there are these bank robbers in super high-tech suits that are robbing New York banks, and Beta Ray Bill turns out to be the one that ends up fighting them.
Yeah,
it's not
Thor
really
never
a Thor
fights
plot.
them.
Thor never fights them, but this bizarre plot shows up. It was really weird. And then it turns out that they're all they're veterans that want to be rich, and I'm like, okay, why don't, instead of, you've got these $1 billion suits, why not, instead of spending $1 billion on each of these suits, just take the $1 billion instead of robbing banks. I think it was really kind of bizarrely dumb. Then there's a kind of a panel where you see one of them's giving a speech, and there's a huge U.S. flag behind them. And I was like, okay, is this supposed to be a parody And it was really interesting to me, that panel, because I thought, okay, have I been reading this whole thing wrong? And I thought, because at the same time, there's this whole thing where all these Asgardian warriors are living in Central Park at the time. They're stranded there. And I'm kind of like, is there some sort of parallel which Simonson wants us to look at there, or he doesn't point it out, maybe he didn't even notice it himself, where these vets have kind of gone astray, and meanwhile these Asgardian warriors are almost infallible. But it was a really strange, very kind of the opposite of what the other stories that we've been talking about, the lofty Asgardian tales.
Yeah, true. I guess he felt like since he had stranded all those characters on Earth, he needed to give them a threat to face.
Yes, but they don't really deal with it. It's only Sith and Bill.
Yeah.
But did you have a take on this whole bank robber song? Like, it was really earthly, despite the metal armor. It was like a real bank robbers.
Yeah, I don't know. They were being controlled by Titanium Man.
Yes.
Was their boss. He was, spoiler alert, but it turns out that Titanium Man is controlling them and has tricked them, and they realize that they're working for a Ruski, and then they turn on him. I don't know. I thought it was just kind of a cute thing, and I didn't think about it having any deeper meaning, and it was kind of a blip in the thread of the whole run.
It was a blip that built up. I mean, it became a large blip by the end. Oh yeah, and they could they could teleport away and turn into cards. Like, these are really expensive suits.
Yeah, they just turn in these little cards, and the other guy who's working for Titanium Man comes and picks them up.
Yeah, crazy.
Seems like that would make them awfully vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really there were a lot of wild ideas in that. I'm not sure they held together, but you just reminded me, there's an interesting thing where the way that Simonson stacks up the subplots over time. So we've got this whole thing with Balder and Carnilla, and it's almost like at the start it's like you might get a one page of them in each issue. And it almost, especially in that first year, it almost works like a newspaper strip where it's like really repetitive. Like you almost get the same information each time. The first panel is like a recap, and then the last panel is like the cliffhanger for next time. But the next time you have to have the recap again, And but he's kind of juggling a lot of balls.
Yeah. At
the beginning, and I really didn't care about the Warriors 3 anytime they showed up. It really kind of had enough. They're supposed to be the comic relief, I guess. But anyway, that's another thing I found he got really good at as the series went on, is balancing all of those subplots and having more. Because the whole thing about Surtur building the sword, that's like 1 page per issue for like 10 issues, I think. And that's another interesting thing, how he kind of weaves in these threads and then brings them around. So I can kind of see how he's building up for the long haul there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, they were really crammed together, and like I noticed there's a lot of scenes, like there's the one with the Wild Hunt where all these millions of dogs are summoned to New York, and at the end they fly away, and it's this tiniest little panel, and the dogs are all these little squiggles, and that's the kind of thing that now no artist would do it in that way. It would be like a full page or a half page or something like that. And later on, there's a scene where all the armies of Asgard go back, and it's literally the bottom right panel. It's like the 8th panel on the page, and there's these little squiggles going through a gate. And there's not a lot of breathing room, especially early on. I think later on, there's like 1 or 2 full page splashes later on.
Yeah, when they're leaving Hell,
right,
sometime around 355, 360. I forgot exactly what issue, but yeah, there's a whole page panel where Thor is when he punches the dog that's guarding the gate.
Oh yeah,
the giant dog.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he crams a lot in an issue. Yeah, I was. reading it on Comixology panel by panel, and it was like, wow, is this still going on? If I could read 2 or 3 modern Marvel comics in the time it takes to read one of these.
Yeah.
And speaking of Comixology, I found the way that Simonson kind of overlaps his panels around. If you look at the page as a whole, you can figure out where the eye should go. But the people who were setting up the guided view kept making mistakes. And,
interesting.
And, completely, in one or two places, they would, completely miss one word balloon, or they include it in the wrong frame of the guided view.
I would say, actually, that I had trouble with some of the word balloons, even reading it on full page. Again, I think it's an issue of there being so much dialogue in there, and I think the letterer was like, well, where am I going to cram this balloon? And sometimes I did read balloons out of order, especially early on. So I don't blame the Comixology tech crew for screwing some of that stuff up, because it was heavy duty.
I'm not sure if it's John Workman, the letterer, or if it's Simonson, but they make a habit of having word balloons that are half and half between 2 panels.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's one down at the bottom, and you're like, well, which one am I supposed to go to? And it was sometimes a little bit sticky for sure. Yeah.
Another thing that I read was by Tom Spielman on Comics Alliance, who I thought made a good point that, so he mentioned that a lot of earlier Thor eras, what was kind of boring about some of them was that they felt kind of impersonal or distant, where in this, even though they're gods, Simonson's able to put in things that feel really kind of personal.
Oh, that's interesting.
One thing that I noticed even before I read that article was how, after Odin apparently dies, Thor, is grieving, and he talks about how wherever he looks, something reminds him of his father. And I think pretty much anybody can relate to that. We've all, gone through some kind of mourning.
Yeah, there's a fill-in, kind of a fill-in issue, which was not drawn by Simonson, was drawn by Sal Buscema, maybe?
I don't remember. I know Buscema drew that Hercules issue right after it, but I don't remember who the artist was on that one.
I think it was Sal Buscema, but that issue was awesome. And I think it was right after the death, and it was all the big war had happened with Surtur, and he was dead, and it was issue 355, and he's in this ice palace with this old guy that we kind of suspect might be Odin, and he keeps denying it. And it was a really great issue, and I think it was one which had very little subplot, except for another dumb one with the Warriors 3 and Macy's, which for some reason had to be stuck in there. But the art was Sal Buscema's, he's no John Buscema, but the art was really great in it. And I loved wondering, I kept thinking that this old guy that had rescued Thor from the ice tundra was Odin. And it was just him talking about his feelings about his father being gone, and this guy kind of advising him. And it was a really touching, well-drawn, airy issue. I mean, there's not 8 panels a page anymore. It's 5. It's a reasonable 5-6, something that has room to breathe and is really an emotional story, and was a real surprise. And it comes just before the bank robbers one, I think, pretty much. Oh, yeah, before the other villain, yeah.
Yeah, I felt like Simonson was hinting, or I don't think he maybe actually was, but he was trying to make us think that guy might be the Christian God, because he used a few phrases from the Bible. Oh.
Well, at the end of it, he says that he's his great-grandfather.
Right. Which, you could, it's up to your interpretation, I suppose, who that actually is.
Yeah,
his
right,
great-grandfather.
right. Okay, that's an interesting take on it. I didn't even notice that. But I did think it was a really solid, as far as single issues go, I think it was amazing.
Yeah, that's right. The credits are at the end.
Of that, that particular one, yeah.
Yeah, Sal Buscema. I was trying to remember what the Bible verses was that I think he referred to the thing from the Old Testament about there is a season for each thing. The same one that the birds pulled on for Turn, Turn, Turn.
Okay.
I think that was one. I think there was another one too. So, that was as far as it went. It wasn't, an obvious clue, but, kind of a hint.
Right. Okay, interesting.
Coming up, being funny without writing jokes, the New Mutants Easter egg, the seemingly changing motives of Lorelei, poking fun at secret identities, and more. First, thanks to our 4 new patrons, Rum Raven, Alberto, Ken, and Kyle. They all signed on just in the first 3 weeks of June. That pushed us past a couple of goals, which means the re-release of more classic episodes, and I've started making them available. They're probably going to come out at a rate of 1 per week, in reverse order. You'll see notifications about new releases of 2007 content on our Facebook and Twitter, and they'll also be publicly available on our Patreon page. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics. When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults, too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Also, as far as, really kind of personal moments, how, Balder, and in a pre-Simonson storyline, went to hell and faced, everyone he'd ever killed and declares himself a pacifist.
Yeah.
And, he has to go through the situation where feels forced to kill again, and how terrible he feels about that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, you could feel how he felt.
Sure. Yeah, totally. And I was glad there was like one pacifist in the series.
Yeah.
Very interesting to see the little notes that said that Balder was in his own comic. That to me was unbelievable. I mean, he's fine as a supporting character, but to me, 4 issues of Balder in his own series sounds crazy.
Well, I mean,
the 80s were an interesting time.
One of those writers said that that's a good series. I'm not sure if Comixology has it or not. I'll have to look. But, I remember around that time, Marvel was experimenting with 4-issue miniseries.
Right.
That was like the latest thing. I remember one of the first ones was a Vision and Scarlet Witch series, and there was another one at the same time. I don't remember what it was. And so this is maybe a year or so after that.
Huh, okay. Yeah, but I would be interested to know about it. Just because he didn't seem like a leading character to me, but I was surprised at how many notes there were about Balder. Every time Balder was not there, it was like there was a little star asterisk. Read Balder issue 2.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell it's 80s comics because there are asterisks everywhere.
Well, can we talk about Midgard?
Yeah. Oh, geez.
Was it a joke? Because it was so.
It got to be.
Every single issue. It was almost like, I don't know if you remember, but 10 years ago we talked about Dr. McNinja, and there was this thing about the little asterisk notes where every time you said C, it would be translated as yes. There would be a little box whenever he said "C" in Spanish, there was a little box that said "yes," and they would stack up in a single panel. And I felt like every issue, I don't know if there was a single one of the 29 issues I read. Was there a single one where Midgard was not explained to be Earth in a little
I don't think so.
note? And it was so. And the thing was, I thought, okay, maybe it's a joke almost. Like I thought it was a little wink at the camera, but at the same time, it was annoying that every time it said Midgard, I looked at the note that said Earth. My eye automatically was trained like Pavlov's dog, because I've read so many comics, to look at the note even though I knew what Midgard was every time, and it drove me nuts. It was a strange.
Yeah, I don't know if what they do about Midgard nowadays. I haven't read the Jason Aaron Thor run. I'd be interested. I mean, I don't know if they just call it that and hope you know, or if they just do what the movies did and just say Earth, or what. But
I think that would be. Yeah, please just call it Earth. Why do they have to call it Midgard? They don't use any.
I think something Stan started, and they just kept, a lot of things that Stan started stuck around for decades after.
Yes. But it's an interesting thing, because really, if they're Norse gods, they wouldn't be speaking English anyway. So why not just say Earth? Why do we have to use Midgard? But that's another interesting thing, is how much of this was really based on Norse mythology. Because sometimes when he went into it, like there was an issue where Odin explains the backstory about Surtur and him and his two brothers going and meeting him for the first time, and I thought, oh, this is like, it really felt like mythic stuff, and I thought it was really interesting. And it's sometimes when I felt like he was going into that kind of stuff he'd read in textbooks about Norse mythology, I thought that stuff was really interesting, and I'm wondering if any of that is, my assumptions about that are true, and I'm also wondering if any previous writers actually did the same.
I'm not sure.
Did you feel like the previous stuff, or have you read any of the Lee Kirby stuff? Was it heavy on mythology?
It's been a long time. I think I read a little bit of it, but it's been a very long time. I'm not sure how much. I mean, obviously they included a lot of the characters from the mythology, but I'm not sure about stories from mythology.
Right.
I wish I were more familiar with it. I was trying to remember, after Odin, disappears, is presumed dead in this story, how long was he gone?
Yeah, I don't know, because I got up to... So, I think he dies around 350...
353 or so.
Okay, yeah, 353.
355 is that one you were talking about, right, that's not drawn by Simonson.
Right.
I think it was a couple before that.
Okay, and then... I got up to 366 and he wasn't back yet. They were still trying to decide who was going to rule over Asgard in his stead.
Yeah, well, I'm not even completely sure if Simonson's the one who brings him back.
Right.
Maybe we've got a listener who can tell us. I was kind of searching around the web and I couldn't find that information.
Right. And also I did wonder, where is Bill now? Is Bill still a character in the Marvel Universe, or is he dead, or what?
I think I've seen him back occasionally. I think he's maybe underused, but he still exists. He's appeared in recent years.
Okay.
Well, let's see. What else do we have to say about this? I don't know. I had trouble taking notes on this because there was just so much going on.
There is a lot going on. I mean, but I do think it's mostly plot. Like, I think thematically, there's a lot less to talk about than we would have in...
Right,
like
I was
Swamp
just
Thing or something like that.
I was just writing down like synopsis a lot of the time, and
yeah,
maybe a comment about it here and there. But
yeah, like I had 1 or 2 words per issue. I mean, I love the fact that the Executioner brings those machine guns to Asgard.
Yeah,
that was really funny. I kind of dug that, and it was crazy that they go to hell, and Thor literally uses the word wrestling. He says, we'll wrestle for the souls to free the souls, and they literally have a fist. It was just, kind of wild, and then there's this whole Secret Wars crossover, and the Beyonder is so boring. What a boring character. And, but I loved that there was, like, Thor had to deal with these kind of contemptuous morals, as he calls them, at that stage. And, one of the Power Pack shows up, and they're like, oh, we'll overcharge her with energy, but they're not sure if it'll work, and it might kill her. Like, they're going to risk the life of this child? There's so many of them, I just have, like, 2 or 3 words of notes. My notes are just, like, 2 or 3 words, like, I can't believe this is happening, or, I can't believe they're going to possibly kill this kid. I don't know how far you got in the frog business, but, like, the rats have this plan to bring rat poison and poison the lake to kill the frogs.
Yeah, I just got to that.
And I'm like, well, if Thor was not in this story, let's imagine that the rat's plan was not stopped, and New York's water supply was poisoned deliberately by rats using rat poison. What would people think about that once they investigated and discovered that rats had done it on purpose? It's like... there's some crazy stuff.
Yeah, call the other frogs as witnesses.
Yeah.
to litigate against the rats.
Yeah. It's lots of fun stuff happens, and I think especially the frog thing especially was, again, I don't know how, that's the kind of thing that you don't imagine Marvel at that time really having the guts to say yes to, and it amazes me that Simonson would have said, I'm going to turn Thor into a frog for 3 issues, and you're going to have to deal with it, and they would say yes to that. But every panel of those issues is so funny. Like when he goes down in the sewer, I'm looking at these pages right now, the frog goes down in the sewer and the Pied Piper's there, and he's escaping and he's jumping across the backs of these alligators that are living in New York sewers, and it's going spoing, 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 and the sound effects of it was so funny. And he's dragging rats around by their tails like he's knocked them out. And
yeah, I mean, there are little comic things throughout the series. One note that I made was, let's see, in 351, during the battle against the demons in New York, and, U.S. military guys are there, and this high-ranking soldier, when he sees Bill, his helmet flies up in the air.
Right.
Because he's so surprised. He says, holy smokes, who's that?
Right. Yeah, that's funny. That's one of those things where I didn't know how seriously I was supposed to take that whole plot.
Yeah, well, he plays with that. How serious? What kind of level of seriousness are we at? He doesn't stay at the same level all the time.
Yeah,
and life doesn't either. So that's what I didn't like about a lot of the Black Panther, where it just felt it was at that serious level all the time.
Right. It's interesting because the frog stuff is very straight. Like,
yeah,
there's no real jokes. Like, this frog says, my name is Puddle Gulp, and it's not like, there's no winking at the camera. It's just like, oh, this is really funny. And this frog's going around beating up these rats, and it's really funny, but none of it is... And, then he says, I have to leave here, I can't marry the princess. And the princess frog looks so sad in the panel. And it's so funny, but it's not, there's no joke, there's no deliberate jokiness about it. It's the same, Thor just speaks the same way he always has, and the dialogue
just lets the situation be funny on its own without...
Right, and in fact the whole plot about bringing the alligators to help in the war against the rats is almost identical to the plot about bringing Carnilla to help fight the army of Surtur. It's the same thing where we'll get the second army, our enemy's army, to come help us. And
the enemy of our enemy is our friend.
Right, and he almost repeats the same kind of plot line in this thing, but it's so... And then there's this... The frog tries to lift the hammer, and it's a bit like that issue of Spider-Man where he's trying to get out of the wreckage, that whole issue, and it's like 2 pages of this frog trying to lift the hammer, and it's really... sincere, and it's really funny. It's not supposed to be. And then he holds up he turns into Thor, and he's holding up his hammer, and it's really straight, but it's It's so ridiculous, it's unbelievable. And those issues were real genius, I think. Yeah.
I don't see much in the latter part of what I read, but in the early issues of the run, there are a lot of sound effects that are drawn like in straight lines, which is really striking. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Most of the time I thought it looked pretty cool. It's certainly different from what you usually see in 80s comics or modern comics.
Well, that's something I noticed too, and I didn't like them in. Sometimes they're just in boxes and like pasted over, and it was just like
there was a place later on where there are cockroaches running around. It says skitter, skitter, skitter in these purple boxes, and that looked bad, I thought. But some of the other places, it's cool.
I didn't like, and that was another thing that I thought was really improved. Like, as I just said, the spring, where he's bouncing across the backs of the alligators, and later on, the sound effects get really good. I think the bummer is that they were actually really kind of interesting sound effects, like when he was swinging the hammer, they would have... Simonson came with all these cool sounds, and I felt like the letterer kind of let it down by just typing the sound effect in instead of like really doing something dynamic with it. Because I'm just kind of flipping through here the issue where the frog fights Loki, which is another crazy thing that happens, and the sound effects are great, like just the way they're splashed out.
By the way, going back to the old man in the ice cave for a second, my notes are a real mess for this episode. So he says, when Thor asks him his name, he kind of equivocates. Well, I've gone by a lot of different names, and he mentions having been called Tiwaz.
Yes.
And I looked that up. It's an ancient god of what's now like the Turkey area.
Oh, how interesting. Okay.
And maybe like into, I don't know, Syria or that area. So, he seems to be representing, I don't know, the Christian god or maybe various sort of deities.
That makes it even more interesting than it already was. That's so cool. Huh.
Okay, yeah, so, right, Buscema drew that one. 356 was penciled by Jackson Geiss, not Buscema. Yeah, okay. And inked by Bob Layton. And that was written by Bob Harris. And that's a really funny issue, too. It has nothing to do with Simonson, but... Okay. That issue is... I mean, it's funny, I think, in kind of a different way than Simonson's humor.
Right.
It's more kind of a straightforward, jokey thing.
Yeah, right. Right.
So,
Yeah, but I didn't. Like I said, I didn't find the ostensible, comedic characters, the Warriors 3, or the comic relief. To me, they were just kind of a chore. And Volstagg, I guess, supposed to be this really funny giant guy that like sits on people and stuff, and it was just whatever.
This is a minor thing, but did you notice? Reading this in guided view, seeing each panel at a time, I noticed it in 362 when they're in hell. There's one panel where you can see like the Thor and his people are going along in the background, and in the foreground there's like this boulder, and hiding from the Asgardians facing us there's a woman in a New Mutants costume. And it turns out I had to Google this because I wasn't reading comics much at the time. It's the New Mutant Magma, who at the same time was in hell in an X-Men annual.
Wow. Holy moly. So this was in 362?
2. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Oh, I'm going to try to find it. I don't think I'll be able to find it now. But
yeah, I found that on a site called supermegamonkey.com. Although it pointed out that in that actual issue, she wasn't wearing her New Mutants costume, but maybe he just had her put it on her to, as shorthand or to point out who this was, since we can't really see her face in the panel.
I think the fact that he included her at all was probably a gag.
Yeah, yeah.
That, editorial didn't say he had to put in, he just chose to put it in.
Well, and, at that time, I think, after around 2001, they kind of loosened up the editorial directive to have continuity across books. But in those days, you had to account for everything. What's happened, if this character is in this other book, then it has to somehow affect what's going on. You have to say when in the continuity of his own book he guessed it in that other book. Where does that fit in? Where now they don't care. They can have... recently they've had Galactus in Fantastic Four and in Doctor Strange, but there's no explanation of which one happened first.
Okay.
They don't care anymore. It got to be too much of a headache, I imagine.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I found a little puzzling. So, Lorelei, from pretty early in the run, she's trying to drug Thor and with this golden mead that will make him love her.
This goes on forever. Issues and issues. Yeah.
And first she's giving him a massage, and then he rushes out without drinking it because something comes up, and there are several kind of missed connections there. And what was her motive at that point? Was she just wanted him to love her, and that was it?
She was just hot for Thor. I don't remember how she got out of it. I was actually, after I'd read the issues, I was like, how did he break the spell? Because finally he is seduced by her. And then he gets into a fight with Loki.
Yeah, because, he drank the golden mead and he loved her, but then he was away from her for issues during the whole battle with Surtur.
Yes.
And it was almost like Simonson had forgotten about that point. But then afterwards, it kind of comes back. But now it's kind of changed because she's working with Loki.
Right.
And, she uses that, Thor loving her for another purpose beyond just... having the hots for him to try to get him to advocate for Loki becoming the ruler of Asgard.
But then the Enchantress puts a spell on the staff, which it's like a Mexican telenovela. So there's a spell on the staff which causes Lorelei, who's not Lorelei, I can't remember what her real name, or was that her real name? Anyway. She ends up falling for Loki and decides to do what Loki wants, and Loki wants to become the ruler of Asgard. I don't remember. But I remember eventually Thor shows up and gets in a big fight with Loki, and then somehow he breaks the spell, and I don't remember how. And I think the mead was diluted at some stage anyway.
Right, yeah, that guy who had the Casket of Ancient Winters figured out what it was somehow and dumped it out and put in some honey and water or something. So, but Thor had drunk it a little bit before that.
Okay.
But yeah, since he didn't get any further doses, then maybe that was part of why he kind of forgot. But then it kind of came back after the battle.
Yeah.
So it didn't quite follow that. I thought that could have been done a little better.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah. And the fact that I can't remember how he actually broke out of it also was annoying me now. And he kissed her anyway. Even after he broken the spell, he kissed her goodbye and then took off.
Yeah, and then, because of that, then he hit Sif, and then that was a whole thing, too.
Yeah.
Where he had to get her forgiveness. And because, they had been an item in Len Wein's run,
okay.
And they broke up in the last issue of that because, well, it was funny because he wanted to stay on Earth, and she wanted him to come back to Asgard because she wanted to go back there, and that was why they broke up. But then in Simonson's run, it becomes like reversed.
Right.
She wants to be on Earth, and he wants to be in Asgard.
Right.
So that was kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many more issues were there? Like, what was the end of the run?
I think it goes like into the 380s.
Wow. Okay. You said you'd read some of this, and then you dropped it before the fill-in issues. And did you ever go back and read it?
I don't think so, no. I'm
Okay,
pretty
so
sure
you
I
haven't read
didn't.
up to the end of this run either.
Right.
Okay.
382 is the last one. Although in some of those, he's only the writer.
Right.
And
Still,
Buscema
it's
comes
45
back.
issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty long
It's like
run.
4 years.
But yeah, I mean, after I graduated from college and I did read some comics, I don't think I was reading Marvels really. I was interested in some of the other stuff Paul had been reading, like Watchmen and Swamp Thing, and yeah, I don't think I read any Marvels at all.
Oh, I remembered the thing about Hell, which the New Mutants episode reminded me that Lois Lane and Clark Kent show up in issue 41.
Yeah, and Clark Kent looks at Thor disguised as Sigurd Yolson and says, that looks like, could it be? Nah.
Yeah. This is also the issue where S.H.I.E.L.D. reveals they can get an ID for Thor, but they can't get an apartment in New York for him because it's too hard to get. That was a bit crazy, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and when Simonson's doing the Sigurd Yulson, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but Thor is a secret identity. He does a lot of poking fun at secret identities.
Yes.
That other guy, Roger, is like, everybody was fooled by Thor's disguise. That's how secret identities work.
Yes.
Like,
and
what?
then the foreman at the job site assumes that he's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Based on his agility. Yeah, so, like, yeah, you're right. There's some funny stuff there, deliberately funny stuff there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Minor thing, but I had to wonder, during the battle in New York against the demons, Thor is in Asgard at that point, but Sif and Bill are kind of leading the New York side of it, and they tricked the demons to flying between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that worked as a tactic, but it was like, what about all the people in the towers?
Yeah.
That would have been a little scary for them, I would think.
Yeah, no, this is definitely the kind of thing that would be dragged out for 2 or 3 years of storyline now. Yeah, there's a lot of... I mean, New York just recovers, and Asgard just recovers. It takes 2 issues to rebuild Asgard, and it was really destroyed. It was down to rubble. It seems to be all right. Yeah, stuff is kind of just... That kind of stuff in the 80s was just... It wasn't really the point of the plot at all, was it? It was just kind of off to the side, don't worry about it. But certainly, I think the weather that New York goes through would have been... There would have been repercussions for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, think of what actually happened to the Twin Towers.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly, still resonates now. I mean, of course, they've built a whole new World Trade Center by now, but yeah, and of course, nobody would have imagined that in the 80s when this was being written.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I did read the Dan Jurgens run later, in the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know that I've really read Thor since then at all, but so it's a little hard for me to judge maybe, but do you think this is worthy of being called kind of the definitive Thor run?
I would... It's hard for me to say because I haven't read... I mean, I've read less than you because I'd like to look at the Lee Kirby stuff before I was to pass judgment and say that this was definitive. But certainly, the way people talk about it is, and I do really love it when I love Beta Ray Bill, and I love Frog Thor, and I loved it when he went really overboard, and I loved it when he went super hard Norse mythology. At least, as I said, I assume that's what it was because I felt that was really rich material there. Mm-hmm. In between stuff, I was a little bit lukewarm on, but that seems to be my reaction to every Marvel that we've been covering on the show lately. So that might just be me.
And he, beyond the Norse mythology, he even gets in like an actual Viking in one issue.
Right,
That surviving Viking. I don't know how he's lived that long, but...
I don't know, but he's down in Antarctica, and, it's not Antarctica with Sauron in it and all the Forbidden Land or whatever it's called. It's just Antarctica, and he's living in a cave.
Savage Land, yeah.
The Savage Land, that's right.
So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to, at some point, read all the Jason Aaron stuff. That's been going on for quite a run, too.
Okay,
but,
and that has a good reputation, does it?
I've heard good things about it.
Okay.
So, and, yeah, I mean, I like the Jurgens run, too. I saw a little bit of negative talk about it in my limited research about Simonson, but...
was that the one where they kind of... I haven't read it, but I heard that they kind of addressed the issue of him being a god?
Yeah, well, there was this whole thing where Asgard kind of took over Earth.
Okay.
And yeah, Thor was a god, and his followers wanted to declare Thursday the Sabbath because it's Thor's day.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was all really interesting.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah, I thought that was a good run too. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely good as well. I want to finish it even though we're done with the podcast now.
Yeah. No, it's certainly there's some super interesting stuff in it for sure, and you can definitely, I feel like after the first year especially, it really starts to, for me, that's when it started to cohere, and he was really playing the long game.
The Mighty Thor is published by Marvel Comics. Tell us what you think. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We have a pretty active Facebook group, so please sign up for some interesting comics discussion. Support the show by pledging at patreon.com/deconcomics. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our series Spider-Man 1963, which is nearing its conclusion, and our new series Tim Catches Up with the MCU, in which I finally start watching all the Marvel movies I missed. Our talk about Marvel's The Avengers came out last Saturday. Pledge $4 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Mulele and I will be here next week to talk about 2 more comics submitted by their creators. And in 2 weeks on Deconstructing Comics, we'll be discussing Alan Moore and Brian Boland's The Killing Joke through the lenses of both trauma and feminism. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.